The truck door would not open. Marcus Reyes pulled the handle twice before he understood why. Someone had wedged a thin metal rod through the frame, jamming it shut from the outside. He stood there in the gravel driveway of the home he had not seen in 4 years, his duffel bag still on his shoulder, and felt the old instinct rise in his chest, the same one that had kept him alive through 6 deployments. Something was wrong here, not later, now. He set the bag down slowly and looked around the property. The fields stretched out behind the house, gold and quiet under the late afternoon sun, just as he remembered them, but near the tree line, close to the old well his grandfather had dug by hand, 3 strangers in orange vests were driving thin metal stakes into the ground. One of them held a tablet. Another was unrolling a long yellow measuring tape across land that had belonged to the Reyes family for 3 generations. Marcus walked toward them without hurrying. Years of training had taught him that a calm walk unsettled people more than a fast one. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice even. The man with the tablet looked up, startled. He was young, maybe 30, with the soft hands of someone who had never done real outdoor work. "This is a scheduled survey," he said. "County authorization. You must be a neighbor?" "I'm the owner," Marcus said. The young man's face changed. He glanced at his colleague, a heavy-set woman with short gray hair, who suddenly seemed very interested in her clipboard. "Sir, our paperwork says this parcel is under review by the county land board. We were told the property was unoccupied." "It's occupied," Marcus said. "It's been in my family since 1961. "I think there's been some confusion," the woman said quickly. "We'll just pack up and confirm with the office." They packed up fast, faster than people usually packed up anything, and drove off in a white pickup with a county seal on the door. Marcus watched them go, then walked back to his own truck and pried the metal rod out of the doorframe with his bare hands. It came free with a metallic screech, and he turned it over in his palm. It was not something that had fallen there by accident. Someone had placed it there on purpose, right before he arrived, as if they had known exactly when he was coming home and wanted him stuck outside his own truck for a few extra minutes. Long enough to watch the surveyors work without being able to stop them right away. He was not a man who believed in coincidences, not after the life he had lived. Inside the farmhouse, dust covered the furniture in soft gray sheets. His grandfather had built this house with lumber cut from these same fields. His mother had been born in the back bedroom, and now, apparently, someone thought they could measure it, stake it, and take it, all while he was 3,000 miles away doing a job that had nearly cost him his life more than once. He found a stack of mail on the kitchen table that his neighbor, Owen Pratt, had been collecting for him. Owen was an old family friend who had promised to keep an eye on the place, while Marcus finished his final deployment. Marcus flipped through the envelopes. Bills, advertisements, and near the bottom, a thick envelope from something called the Ashford County Land Development Board. He opened it standing at the counter, still in his travel clothes, dust from the road still on his boots. The letter was dated 8 months earlier. It informed the property owner that the parcel located at 4 Cedar Ridge Road had been reclassified from agricultural residential to mixed commercial use, following a unanimous vote by the county council. It cited an obscure clause about abandoned or absentee-owned land eligible for expedited rezoning in the interest of regional development. It requested that the owner contact the board within 30 days to discuss compensation and transition timelines. 30 days. The letter was 8 months old, and Marcus had been on the other side of the world, in places where mail did not reach, doing work he could not even talk about to his own sister. He read it twice, then a third time, and each time the anger in his chest grew a little colder and a little more controlled. This was not something that happened by accident. Someone had chosen this exact address, at this exact time, knowing the owner was deployed and unreachable. Someone had used his absence like a weapon. He picked up his phone and called the one person he trusted more than anyone else in the world. Elena answered on the second ring. "You're finally home," she said, and he could hear the smile in her voice before it faded into concern. "Marcus, you okay? You sound strange." "Come out to the house," he said. "Tonight, if you can." "What's going on?" "They tried to take the land, Elena, while I was gone. They tried to take Grandpa's land." There was a long pause on the line. When Elena spoke again, her voice had changed completely. sharpened into something Marcus recognized instantly. It was the voice she used in courtrooms, the voice that had made grown men in expensive suits sit up straighter across a table from her. "Don't sign anything," she said. "Don't talk to anyone from that board. Don't even open the door for them. I'll be there in 2 hours." Marcus hung up and looked out the kitchen window at the fields, gold and endless in the fading light, and for the first time since he'd landed back on American soil, he understood that coming home was not going to be the peaceful thing he had imagined for 4 long years overseas. Somewhere out there, people who had never held a rifle, who had never lost a friend, who had never sacrificed a single comfortable night of sleep for anything larger than themselves, had decided that his family's land was theirs for the taking. They had picked the wrong family. Elena arrived just after 8, her car sliding into the driveway in a spray of gravel. She stepped out already talking, a leather folder tucked under one arm, her dark hair pulled back in the same practical braid she'd worn since law school. 4 years apart had not changed the way she carried herself, like she was already 3 steps ahead of whatever room she walked into. "Show me everything," she said, before she had even hugged him. Then she stopped, looked at him properly, and pulled him into a tight embrace instead. "God, I missed you. I'm glad you're home. I'm sorry it's like this." "Me too," Marcus said quietly. They sat at the kitchen table with the letter between them, the single bare bulb overhead casting long shadows across the old wood. Elena read it once, slowly, her finger tracing each line. Then she read it again. Marcus watched her expression shift from concern to something colder and more focused, the look she got when she found a loose thread in an opponent's argument. "This clause," she said, tapping the paper. "Expedited rezoning for absentee-owned land in the interest of regional development. I've never seen it invoked. Not once. In 9 years of practicing land use law in this county. And I would know. I've read every ordinance on the books twice." "Is it legal?" "Technically, maybe. On paper. But the way they used it, targeting your address specifically, timing it to your deployment, that's not regional development policy. That's something else." She looked up at him. "Marcus, who knew you were deployed? Who knew exactly when you'd be gone, and exactly when you were coming back?" Marcus thought about it. His unit knew. The Navy knew. Owen knew, because he'd been watching the house. And the county clerk's office would have known, because his change of address and deployment status were on file for tax purposes. "The county would have records," he said slowly. "My deployment dates, my return date, all of it." Elena's jaw tightened. "Then someone on that board pulled your file. Someone looked up exactly when you'd be gone, and exactly when you'd be back, and they filed this the moment it was safe to do it. They wanted you to come home to a done deal. They wanted it finished before you ever had a chance to fight it." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old window panes, and somewhere far off a dog barked twice and went quiet. Marcus glanced toward the dark fields beyond the glass, thinking of the strangers with their stakes and their tape measures, thinking of the metal rod jammed into his truck door, thinking of how precisely timed all of it had been. "There's something else," Elena said, her voice dropping lower, more careful now. "I need you to hear this before I say anything else, because I don't want you to think I'm bringing my own work into your problem. But I've been building a case against certain members of that same council for almost a year now. Environmental violations. Illegal waste disposal near the county reservoir. I always suspected there was a piece of land connected to it that I couldn't identify. Land they wanted control of, quietly, without anyone asking too many questions." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. "This land? I don't know yet," Elena said, "but I intend to find out. And if it is, Marcus, then this isn't just about a zoning letter anymore. This is about people who are willing to break the law to protect something much bigger than a piece of paper. People like that don't stop because a soldier comes home and asks polite questions." Marcus looked down at the letter again, at the official seal stamped in the corner, at the confident, bureaucratic language designed to sound routine, designed to sound like nothing worth fighting. He thought about the calm way the surveyors had packed up and driven off the moment they realized he was home. Not scared exactly, just efficient, like men who had rehearsed exactly what to do if this happened. "They picked the wrong soldier," he said quietly, "and they're about to find out they picked the wrong sister too." Elena almost smiled, but her eyes stayed serious. "Get some sleep," she said, gathering the letter carefully into a clear plastic sleeve, the way she treated anything that might one day sit in front of a judge. Tomorrow morning, I start pulling every record that board has ever filed. And you, she added, standing, pausing at the door to look back at him, you keep your eyes open out here. If they were bold enough to time a rezoning letter around your deployment, I don't want to think about what else they might try now that you're home and asking questions. She left him standing alone in the kitchen, the bare bulb humming overhead, the fields outside swallowed by darkness. Marcus locked the front door for the first time in years, checked the windows twice, and lay awake a long while listening to the wind move through the cedar trees his grandfather had planted, wondering exactly how far the people behind that letter were willing to go to keep what they had already decided belonged to them. He did not sleep well that night. Somewhere in the back of his mind, the same instincts that had kept him alive in far more dangerous places than this quiet farmhouse were telling him that the letter was only the beginning, and that whoever had written it was not finished yet. The brakes failed on the second morning. Marcus was halfway down Cedar Ridge Road, coasting toward town to meet Elena at the county records office, when he pressed the pedal and felt nothing beneath his foot but air. The truck kept rolling, gaining speed on the downhill slope, and for one long second his mind went completely quiet, the way it always did, in the instant before real trouble arrived. Training took over, where panic wanted to live. He pumped the pedal twice, felt it sink uselessly to the floor, and pulled the emergency brake hard while steering into the gravel shoulder. The truck fishtailed, tires screaming against loose stone, and finally shuddered to a stop inches from the drainage ditch that ran along the old Hendricks property. He sat there for a moment with both hands still gripping the wheel, his heart steady, but his mind racing through possibilities. He had driven this truck 2 days earlier without any trouble. He had parked it overnight in his own driveway, in a house that, until recently, nobody had any reason to visit. He got out and crouched beside the front wheel, and it did not take him long to find what he already suspected he would find: a thin, deliberate cut along the brake line, clean enough that it would hold just long enough for a short drive before letting go entirely. Not the work of wear and rust. The work of a knife, or something very much like one. He photographed it carefully with his phone, the way Elena had taught him to document anything before touching it, then called her before he called anyone else. "I need you to come get me," he said. "And I need you to bring a camera and gloves, because someone just tried to make my truck kill me on Cedar Ridge Road." There was silence on the line for a moment, and when Elena spoke again, her voice had lost every trace of warmth. "Don't move the truck. Don't touch anything else. I'm calling Sheriff Briggs and I'm coming straight there." Sheriff Harold Briggs arrived 20 minutes later in his patrol car, a heavy-set man in his 50s with a gray mustache and tired eyes that had seen most of what a small county could offer in the way of trouble. He examined the brake line with a flashlight, made a few notes, and finally straightened up with the careful, non-committal expression of a man who did not want to say too much too quickly. "Could be mechanical failure," he said. "Old truck, sitting unused for years. Rubber lines dry out. Rust weakens metal." "That's not rust," Elena said, crouching beside him and pointing at the clean edge of the cut with a gloved finger. "Rust doesn't leave a straight line like that. This was cut, Sheriff, and you know it." Briggs sighed, the sigh of a man who had lived in this county his whole life and understood exactly whose feathers might get ruffled if he agreed with her out loud. "I'll write it up," he said. "I'll send it to the state lab for a proper look. But I'll be honest with you both. Evidence like this takes weeks to come back, sometimes months. And in the meantime, I can't exactly go accusing anyone on the county council of something this serious without proof that would hold up." "Then get the proof," Elena said sharply. "Because 2 days ago, someone rezoned my brother's land while he was risking his life overseas, and now his brakes have been cut the moment he starts asking questions about it. That is not a coincidence, Sheriff, and if something worse happens to him next, I will make certain the entire state knows exactly how many warnings this office chose to ignore." Briggs looked at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes, and Marcus understood in that look that the sheriff believed her completely. He simply did not yet have the courage, or perhaps the power, to say so out loud. "Keep your doors locked," Briggs said finally, closing his notebook. "Both of you. And Marcus, I'd think hard about where you're parking that truck of yours from now on." After the sheriff left, Elena drove Marcus back to the farmhouse in silence, her knuckles pale against the steering wheel. It was not until they were both seated at the kitchen table again, the same table where they had read the rezoning letter 2 nights earlier, that she finally spoke. "I found something this morning, before your call," she said, opening her leather folder and spreading a series of documents across the wood. "I went through the county's environmental filings going back 3 years. There have been 4 unexplained chemical spills near the Ashford Reservoir watershed, all of them quietly settled without public hearings, all of them tied to a shell company called Meridian Holdings. I've spent months trying to find out who actually owns Meridian Holdings, because the paperwork is buried under 3 layers of legal shell companies designed specifically to hide it." "And you found it?" "Not the full picture yet. But I found something else instead, something I wasn't even looking for." She pulled out a surveyor's map, official county stamp in the corner, and laid it flat between them. "This is a hydrology map of underground water flow in this part of the county. Look here." She traced a thin blue line with her finger, a line that ran directly beneath the old well near the tree line, the same well where the surveyors had been driving their stakes 2 days earlier. This underground channel connects almost directly to the reservoir watershed. If someone wanted to dispose of something quietly, somewhere far from public eyes, somewhere the ground itself would carry it away before anyone noticed, this parcel of land would be almost perfect for it. Marcus felt the pieces sliding into place, with the grim clarity of a puzzle he did not want solved. "They don't just want the land for development," he said slowly. "They want it because something is already buried here, or something has already leaked here, and they need it under their control before anyone starts digging in the wrong place." "That's my theory," Elena said, "and it would explain everything. Why they waited until you were deployed, why they used an obscure legal clause almost nobody has ever invoked, why they wanted this settled quietly, with no hearings, no public notice, nothing that might draw attention to a piece of land sitting directly above a channel that feeds the town's water supply." Marcus stood and walked to the window, looking out toward the tree line where the well sat, half hidden in tall grass, exactly as it had for 60 years. His grandfather had drawn water from that well by hand every morning of his life. The idea that something poisonous might be sitting beneath it now, waiting, filled him with an anger that felt entirely different from the sharp, controlled fury of a soldier under threat. This was something older and deeper, something closer to grief. "We need proof," he said finally, turning back to Elena. "Real proof, not just maps and theories, something that would hold up in front of a judge, because if you're right about this, then whoever is behind Meridian Holdings has already shown they're willing to risk killing me to keep it quiet, and they will not stop just because we ask them nicely." Elena nodded slowly, gathering the documents back into her folder with careful, precise movements. "I have a contact," she said. "A hydrologist named Priscilla Doyle, who used to consult for the county before she resigned, 2 years ago, under circumstances nobody ever fully explained. If anyone knows what's really running beneath this property, it's her. I'll reach out tonight." "And in the meantime?" "In the meantime," Elena said, standing and gathering her things, her voice hardening into the same courtroom tone Marcus remembered from years of watching her work. "You do not drive anywhere alone. You do not accept any visitors you don't recognize, and you keep that phone charged and next to you at all times, because whoever cut those brakes is going to realize very soon that it did not work, and people who fail once tend to try again, only smarter the second time." She left just before sunset, and Marcus spent the evening walking the perimeter of the property with a flashlight, checking the fence line, checking the barn, checking every shadow the way he had once checked every doorway and rooftop in places far more dangerous than this quiet stretch of farmland. The old training never really left a person. It only waited, dormant, until the moment it was needed again. 2 days later, Priscilla Doyle agreed to meet them, but only in person, and only somewhere far from Ashford County, in a diner off the interstate, where nobody would recognize her face. She arrived wearing sunglasses despite the overcast sky, glancing at the door every few minutes as she spoke, a woman whose nervous energy told its own story before she said a single word. "I signed papers when I left that job," she said quietly, stirring coffee she never drank. "Papers that said I wouldn't discuss what I found. But I have grandchildren who drink water from that reservoir, and I have carried this for 2 years, and I am tired of carrying it alone. What did you find? Elena asked gently. Contamination, Priscilla said. Industrial solvents, well above safe limits, moving slowly through the groundwater toward the reservoir intake. I traced the source back to a parcel near Cedar Ridge Road, but before I could finish my report, I was told the investigation was being closed, that the readings were within acceptable range, and that my services were no longer needed. She finally looked up, meeting Elena's eyes directly. I have my original field notes, the real ones, not the ones that ended up in the official file. I kept copies, because even then, I knew something was wrong. Marcus felt the last piece of doubt in his mind fall away entirely. This was no longer a dispute over a zoning letter, or an old family property. This was about protecting an entire town from something toxic that powerful people had chosen to bury, rather than clean up, and his family's land had simply been standing in the way of that decision. Will you testify? Elena asked quietly. Priscilla was silent for a long moment, her hands wrapped tightly around her cooling coffee cup. Outside the diner window, cars rushed past on the interstate, ordinary people going about ordinary lives, entirely unaware of what was moving quietly beneath the ground they walked on. Yes, she said finally, but you should both understand something before we go any further. The people who closed my investigation are not amateurs. They are patient, and they are careful, and they have resources neither of you can fully imagine yet. If you are going to fight them, you had better be prepared to fight all the way to the end, because they will not stop simply because the truth becomes inconvenient for them. Marcus glanced at Elena across the table, and in her eyes he saw the same steady resolve he remembered from every courtroom victory she had ever described to him over the phone. Calls from opposite sides of the world, two siblings who had chosen very different battles, yet had somehow always circled back to the same fight, protecting the people and places, too easily forgotten by those who held the power to forget them. We're prepared, Marcus said quietly, and for the first time since coming home, he meant it completely. The county archive smelled of old paper and dust, and Elena had spent 3 straight days buried inside it, pulling files that had not seen daylight in years. Marcus sat across from her at a long wooden table, a stack of property records between them, learning for the first time exactly how patient a legal fight could be. It was nothing like combat. There was no immediate danger in these rooms, only slow, grinding work, and yet Elena moved through it with the same intensity he had seen in soldiers preparing for a mission, checking every detail twice, trusting nothing at face value. Here, she said, sliding a folder across the table. Meridian Holdings was registered 4 years ago, right around the time the first unexplained spill was recorded near the reservoir. The listed agent is a law firm in the state capital, but look at the filing signature. Marcus leaned in, studying the faded ink. Gerald Whitmore, he read aloud. That name sounds familiar. It should, Elena said grimly. He's the chairman of the Ashford County Land Development Board, the same board that sent you that rezoning letter. Marcus sat back slowly, the pieces clicking together with a weight that settled heavily in his chest. So the man who runs the board that stole my land also owns the company responsible for poisoning the water underneath it. I can't prove ownership yet, not directly, Elena said. Shell companies are built specifically to hide that kind of connection. But a signature on an early filing, before the lawyers cleaned everything up, that's a mistake. People make mistakes when they think nobody will ever look closely enough to catch them. Over the following days, a picture began to form, piece by piece, the way a photograph slowly appears in developing chemical. Gerald Whitmore had served on the county council for nearly 15 years, quietly building relationships with developers and construction companies throughout the region. 4 years ago, according to Priscilla Doyle's hidden field notes, an industrial client of one of those companies had been dumping solvent waste on a piece of unused land near the reservoir, cutting corners to avoid the cost of proper disposal. When the contamination began spreading through the groundwater, threatening to reach the reservoir intake and trigger a public health crisis, Whitmore had used his position on the board to bury the investigation rather than expose the company responsible, likely in exchange for money, favors, or both. But contamination did not stay hidden forever. It moved, it spread, and according to Priscilla's notes, the underground channel beneath the Reyes property was now the fastest remaining path for the contamination to reach the reservoir. If the land stayed in Marcus's hands, sooner or later an environmental inspection, a well test, a routine water sample, something would eventually reveal the truth. But if the board controlled the land directly, they could control who tested it, when, and how the results were reported. They could keep burying the truth indefinitely, as long as nobody with real motivation to look closely ever owned that particular acre of ground. That's why they wanted it so badly, Marcus said one evening, sitting on the porch as the sun dropped behind the tree line. Not for development, for control. As long as they own it, they own the story. And as long as you own it, Elena said, sitting beside him with a cup of tea cooling in her hands, you're a threat to that story, whether you realize it or not. Which is exactly why they cut your brake line the moment you started asking questions. Marcus was quiet for a long while, watching the light fade over land his family had cared for since before either of them were born. We need Priscilla's original field notes entered into an official record, he said finally. Something a judge can act on. Something that can't just quietly disappear the way her first investigation did. I'm already working on it, Elena said. But I need something else too. A current water sample, taken directly from your well, tested by an independent lab, with no connection to the county. If we can show active contamination right now, today, it becomes almost impossible for anyone to argue this is old news or ancient history. They collected the sample together the following morning, filling 3 sterile containers from the old well near the tree line, the same well where Marcus's grandfather had drawn water every day of his working life. Marcus found himself standing there a long moment after the containers were sealed, one hand resting on the weathered stone rim, thinking of a man who had built this life from nothing, who had trusted this land completely, never imagining that decades later, someone would try to poison it quietly and steal it away, while his grandson served a country far from home. Elena drove the samples herself to an independent laboratory 2 counties away, a place with no ties whatsoever to Ashford County politics, and Marcus spent the following days doing something he had not expected to spend his homecoming doing, watching his own property like a soldier on guard duty, walking the fence line at dawn and dusk, noting every car that slowed near the driveway, every unfamiliar face in town. It was during one of those watchful evenings that he noticed the sedan parked at the edge of the county road, half hidden beneath the low branches of an oak tree, engine off, headlights dark. He watched it for nearly 20 minutes from the porch, staying perfectly still, letting his eyes adjust fully to the darkness, the way years of training had taught him. Eventually the sedan pulled away, no lights, rolling silently down the slope before the engine finally started somewhere out of sight. He called Elena immediately. "Someone's watching the house," he said. "A sedan, parked at the road for 20 minutes, no lights, left just now." "Did you get a plate?" "Partial. First 3 characters. I couldn't get the rest in the dark." There was a pause on the line, and when Elena spoke again, her voice carried a tension he had not heard from her before, not even after the brake line incident. "Marcus, I think it's time you stopped staying out there alone." "I'm not leaving the property," he said firmly. "If I leave, they win before we've even started fighting. This land belongs to our family, and I am not going to hand it to men who tried to kill me over a legal technicality." "I'm not asking you to leave," Elena said. "I'm telling you I'm coming to stay with you until this is finished. 2 sets of eyes are better than 1, and frankly, I'd feel better knowing exactly where you are every night, given everything we've uncovered so far." She arrived within the hour, a bag over her shoulder and a laptop bag in her other hand, and for the first time since childhood, brother and sister found themselves sharing the old farmhouse together, taking turns watching the road while the other slept, piecing together evidence by lamplight late into the night. The lab results came back 6 days later, and Elena read them at the kitchen table, with a stillness that told Marcus everything before she even spoke a single word aloud. "It's confirmed," she said quietly. "Solvent contamination in the well water, well above safe limits, consistent with the compounds described in Priscilla's original field notes. This isn't old contamination slowly fading away. This is active, ongoing, and it's getting worse." Marcus felt a strange mixture of vindication and dread settle over him. They finally had proof. Real, scientific, undeniable proof. But proof also meant the danger was no longer theoretical. Somewhere out there, Gerald Whitmore and whoever worked alongside him now had every reason to believe that Marcus and Elena were close to exposing everything they had spent years hiding, and men who had already tried once to eliminate a threat, quietly, were unlikely to simply give up because their first attempt had failed. "We need to move carefully now," Elena said, gathering the lab report into a protective folder, alongside Priscilla's notes and the property records connecting Whitmore to Meridian Holdings. "If we go to the sheriff with this, and it leaks to the wrong person before we're ready, they could destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or worse. We need everything locked down and ready to present all at once, publicly, in a way that can't simply be buried by a phone call from the right person to the wrong office." "A town hall," Marcus said suddenly. "The county council holds an open session every month, don't they? Public comment period, open to any resident." Elena's eyes lit with the same sharp focus he remembered from her greatest courtroom stories. "The next session is in 11 days, she said. "If we present everything there, in public, in front of every resident and every reporter who bothers to show up, they can't quietly make it disappear afterward. Too many witnesses, too many people asking the same questions at once." "Then that's our deadline," Marcus said. 11 days to build a case strong enough that nobody in that room can ignore it." The following days passed in a blur of careful, methodical work. Priscilla agreed to testify in person, despite her fear, once Elena assured her that public exposure would actually protect her, rather than endanger her further, since silencing a witness after her testimony became public record would accomplish nothing for the people trying to hide the truth. Elena tracked down 2 additional witnesses, former employees of the industrial company responsible for the original dumping, both of whom had left their jobs under strange circumstances, and both of whom, after some persuasion, agreed to speak about what they had witnessed years earlier. Marcus, meanwhile, focused on security, both for the physical evidence they had gathered and for the people willing to testify. He arranged for copies of every document to be stored in multiple locations, some digital, some physical, spread across people he trusted completely, so that no single act of theft or destruction could erase what they had built. He drove Priscilla home himself after each meeting, watching the road behind them the entire way, and he made certain Elena was never alone in public without at least one other person nearby. 3 days before the town hall session, the intimidation began in earnest. Elena received an anonymous letter at her office, unsigned, warning her in vague but unmistakable language that continuing her current investigation would have serious professional consequences for her career and her reputation. The following day, a formal complaint appeared before the State Bar Association, alleging that Elena had engaged in unethical conduct during an unrelated case from 2 years earlier, a complaint that Elena quickly recognized as recycled from a dispute that had already been resolved in her favor at the time. "They're trying to discredit me before I can present anything," she told Marcus that evening, her voice tight with controlled anger rather than fear. "If they can convince people I'm not trustworthy, it won't matter how strong our evidence is. People will dismiss it before they even hear it properly." "Can they actually hurt you with this?" "Professionally, it's a distraction, nothing more. The complaint is baseless, and I can prove it in about 10 minutes, if it ever goes anywhere formal. But that's not really the point, is it? The point is to rattle me, to make me spend the next 3 days defending myself instead of finishing our preparation." "Then don't let them," Marcus said simply. "Let me handle security and logistics. You focus entirely on the case. We're not backing down 3 days before the finish line." That same night, as if to prove exactly how far they were willing to go, Priscilla Doyle called Elena in a state of quiet panic, explaining that someone had broken into her car while it was parked outside her home, taking nothing of obvious value except a laptop bag that had, until that afternoon, contained a backup copy of her original field notes. Fortunately, Elena had insisted on scanning and storing digital copies of every document weeks earlier, spread across 3 separate secure locations, exactly for this reason. But the message behind the theft was unmistakable. Someone knew exactly what Priscilla had, and exactly how much it threatened them. "They're getting desperate," Elena said, standing at the kitchen window that night, watching the dark road beyond the fence line. "Desperate people make mistakes, Marcus. But desperate people are also the most dangerous, because they've stopped calculating the cost of what they're willing to do." Marcus stood beside her, both of them silent for a long moment, watching the same stretch of quiet county road, where a metal rod had once jammed his truck door, and where a sedan had once idled in the darkness, watching a house it had no right to watch. 8 more days, he said finally. 8 more days, and everything we've found becomes public, all at once, in front of the whole town. After that, it won't matter what they try, because the truth will already be out there, and truth, once it's public, is very hard to put back in the ground. Elena nodded slowly, her reflection pale in the dark glass of the window. Let's make sure we get there, she said quietly, both of us, together, with everything we need. Outside, the wind moved through the cedar trees their grandfather had planted decades earlier, and somewhere beneath the quiet fields, invisible and patient, the poisoned water continued its slow journey toward the reservoir, waiting for the truth to finally catch up to it. Gerald Whitmore sat in his office above the county courthouse, watching the evening traffic move slowly through downtown Ashford, a glass of amber liquid untouched on his desk. Across from him sat 2 men he trusted with the parts of his business that never appeared in any public record. Nathan Cole, a council member who owed his position almost entirely to Whitmore's quiet financial support during 3 separate elections, and Edward Lang, a private security contractor whose services Whitmore had used sparingly over the years, and always for problems that required a certain kind of discretion. The brake line was a mistake, Whitmore said finally, breaking the silence. I told you, subtle pressure, nothing that could be traced. Instead, I nearly created a dead war hero on a public road, which would have brought federal investigators into my county within a week. It failed, Edward said flatly. No harm done. No investigation opened beyond a routine report that's already gathering dust in the sheriff's filing cabinet. No harm done, Whitmore repeated, his voice tightening. The man's sister is a land use attorney who has apparently spent the better part of a year quietly building a case against Meridian Holdings. Now they're working together. Do either of you understand what happens if that woman connects my name to that company in a courtroom? Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. We could offer a settlement, he suggested. A generous one. Buy the land at triple market value. Frame it as a goodwill gesture toward a returning veteran. It solves the ownership problem without any further risk. It's too late for that, Whitmore said. If she's already found the connection to Meridian, money won't make the contamination disappear. She wants the truth exposed, not a payout. People like her always do. He rubbed his temples slowly, the calm, practiced composure of a man used to controlling every room he entered, beginning to fray at the edges. Find out what they're planning. I want to know every meeting, every witness, every document, before they walk into that town hall session. If we know what they intend to present, we can prepare a response before they ever open their mouths. Edward Lang nodded once and left without another word, the kind of silent, efficient exit that told Whitmore his instructions would be carried out with precision, and likely with methods he preferred never to ask too many detailed questions about. 3 days before the scheduled town hall session, Marcus noticed the same gray sedan again, this time parked outside the diner in town, where he had stopped for coffee. A man inside pretending to read a newspaper, while watching the reflection of the door in his side mirror. Marcus walked directly to the car and rapped twice on the window, and the man startled visibly before rolling it down halfway. Help you with something? Marcus asked, his voice calm but unmistakably firm. Just parked here for lunch, the man said, not meeting his eyes. Funny, Marcus said. I've seen this exact car outside my property twice this week. You'll forgive me if I find that a little more than coincidental. The man said nothing, rolled the window back up, and drove away moments later. Marcus photographed the license plate this time, full and clear, and sent it directly to Elena before he had even finished his coffee. It traces back to a private security firm, registered out of the state capital, Elena told him that evening, scrolling through search results on her laptop at the kitchen table. Meridian Access Solutions. Same word, Meridian, appearing again. I don't think that's a coincidence either. So Whitmore's watching us directly now, Marcus said. Not subtly anymore. He wants us to know he's watching. Or he's getting careless because he's running out of time, Elena said. Either way, it confirms we're close enough to make him nervous, which means we're close enough to be right. The following evening, The pressure escalated in a way neither of them had fully anticipated. Marcus returned from town to find the front door of the farmhouse standing slightly ajar, though he was certain he had locked it before leaving. He entered carefully, moving through each room the way he had once moved through unfamiliar buildings on deployment, checking corners, checking closets, his heart steady, despite the adrenaline running through his veins. Nothing appeared to be missing. But in the kitchen, resting squarely in the center of the table where the rezoning letter had once sat, was a single folded note. He picked it up carefully, using the edge of a dish towel rather than his bare fingers, and unfolded it to read a short typed message with no signature. Some things are better left buried. For your own safety and your sister's, consider walking away from this before someone gets hurt. He photographed the note exactly where it had lain, called Elena immediately, and then called Sheriff Briggs, who arrived within the half hour looking considerably less non-committal than he had after the brake line incident. This is escalating fast, Briggs admitted, examining the note through a plastic evidence sleeve. Breaking and entering, leaving a written threat. That's a different category of trouble than a cut brake line I can't quite prove. I'm going to increase patrols out this way, and I want you both to consider very seriously whether staying out here alone is wise. We're not leaving, Marcus said again, the same firm resolve he had held on to since the beginning. That's exactly what they want. If we run, they win by default, and whatever's leaking into that water keeps leaking while they cover their tracks completely. Briggs studied him for a long moment, then looked at Elena, who nodded her own quiet agreement. All right, the sheriff said finally. But you let me know your schedule from here forward. Where you're going, when you'll be back. I'll have a car swing by more often, and I want your word you'll call me the second anything else feels wrong, no matter how small it seems. After Briggs left, Elena sat down heavily at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where the note had been found. They broke into our home, Marcus. They walked through this house while we were out, just to leave a piece of paper telling us to be afraid. That's not the behavior of confident men. That's the behavior of men who are starting to panic. I know, Marcus said. Which means the next 2 days matter more than anything we've done so far. We need to make sure everything we have is completely secure, and we need to make sure that if something happens to either of us before that town hall session, the evidence still gets presented anyway. They spent the following day distributing complete copies of every document to 3 separate trusted contacts, people with no direct connection to either of them that Whitmore's people could easily identify, including Owen Pratt, Marcus's old family friend, and a colleague of Elena's from a neighboring county's law office, who had no history with the Ashford County Council whatsoever. Each contact received strict instructions. If anything happened to Marcus or Elena, or if either of them failed to check in by a specific time, the documents would be released immediately to state investigators and to every news outlet in the region. It's not a perfect solution, Elena admitted, but it removes the incentive for anything drastic. If silencing us doesn't actually stop the truth from coming out, there's no logical reason left for them to try. Logic and desperation don't always agree with each other, Marcus said quietly, remembering the cold precision of the cut brake line, the calculated timing of the original rezoning letter, the way an entire county's official machinery had been quietly turned against his family the moment he had stepped off a plane and started asking questions. 2 nights before the town hall, Priscilla Doyle called in a state of visible distress, explaining that she had received a phone call from an unknown number warning her that her testimony would be, in the caller's exact words, professionally and personally regrettable, and reminding her that she had signed confidentiality agreements that could be enforced in civil court, regardless of what she believed the public deserved to know. I'm scared, she admitted quietly over the phone, her voice trembling slightly. Not just for myself. I have grandchildren, Elena. What if this follows them somehow? Elena drove to Priscilla's home that same night, sitting with her for nearly 2 hours, walking her carefully through exactly what legal protections existed for whistleblowers reporting genuine public health concerns, and reminding her that the confidentiality agreement she had signed could not lawfully be used to hide an active, ongoing threat to an entire town's water supply. You're not breaking any real law by telling the truth, Elena told her gently. You're only breaking the silence certain powerful people have been counting on to protect themselves. There's a difference. and any judge in this state would see that difference immediately. By the time Elena left, Priscilla had agreed to testify after all, though her hands still trembled slightly as she walked Elena to the door. The night before the town hall session, Marcus and Elena sat together on the porch one final time, reviewing every piece of evidence they had gathered, checking and rechecking the order in which they would present it, anticipating every possible objection or interruption Whitmore's allies on the council might attempt. "We present the property records first," Elena said, establishing the connection between Whitmore and Meridian Holdings, clearly and factually, before anyone has a chance to dismiss it as speculation. Then Priscilla's original field notes, followed immediately by the independent lab results, confirming active contamination right now, not years ago. Then the two former employees, describing exactly what they witnessed during the original dumping. "And the note," Marcus added, "the threat left in our own kitchen. I think the town needs to understand exactly what lengths these people have already gone to in order to keep this quiet." Elena nodded slowly, closing her folder with a decisive motion. "Tomorrow, everything changes," she said. "One way or another, by tomorrow night, this town will know the truth, and Whitmore will no longer have the luxury of quiet, careful control over what happens next." Marcus looked out at the dark fields stretching toward the tree line, toward the old well where his grandfather had drawn clean water every morning for decades, water that was no longer clean, hidden beneath a betrayal, orchestrated by men who valued profit and power, far above the town they had been trusted to protect. "Tomorrow," he agreed quietly. "Let's finish what they started, the moment they decided my family's land was theirs to take." Neither of them slept much that night, each taking turns watching the road one final time, waiting for a dawn that would either vindicate everything they had risked or bring consequences neither of them was entirely prepared to imagine. The community hall was already crowded by the time Marcus and Elena arrived, folding chairs filled with familiar faces from around the county, farmers and shopkeepers and teachers, all gathered for what most of them believed would be an ordinary monthly council session. A local reporter named Claire Bennett sat near the front row with a notepad on her knee, someone Elena had quietly reached out to 2 days earlier, careful to explain everything without revealing anything the council might use to prepare a counterattack in advance. At the front of the room, behind a long table draped with the county seal, sat 5 council members. Gerald Whitmore occupied the center seat, composed and unreadable, his gray suit pressed and his expression carefully neutral, the look of a man who had spent decades mastering the art of appearing calm while calculating every possible outcome behind his eyes. Nathan Cole sat 2 seats down, glancing occasionally toward the back of the room, toward the door, as if expecting trouble to arrive at any moment. The session opened with routine county business, budget discussions, a proposed road repair schedule, matters that meant nothing to Marcus as he sat beside Elena, his hands steady, despite the tension coiled tightly beneath his calm exterior. Finally, the moderator called for public comment, and Elena rose from her seat, her leather folder held firmly in both hands. "My name is Elena Reyes," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the crowded hall, without need of a microphone. "I'm an attorney, and a resident of this county, and I'm here tonight because every person in this room deserves to know something the council has spent years working very hard to hide." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Whitmore's expression did not change, though his hand tightened almost imperceptibly around the pen resting on the table before him. Elena walked the room through everything methodically, exactly as she and Marcus had rehearsed. She presented the property records showing Gerald Whitmore's early, unguarded signature on the founding documents of Meridian Holdings. She displayed Priscilla Doyle's original field notes, contrasted directly against the sanitized official report that had replaced them years earlier. She read the independent lab results confirming active, ongoing contamination in groundwater flowing directly beneath the Reyes property, moving steadily toward the reservoir that supplied drinking water to nearly every family sitting in that room. A tense silence settled over the hall as she spoke, broken only by the occasional gasp or whispered exchange between neighbors realizing, together, exactly what had been happening beneath their feet for years without their knowledge. Then Priscilla Doyle stood, her hands trembling slightly but her voice steady, and described in her own words the moment 2 years earlier when she had been quietly told to close her investigation and forget what she had discovered, despite knowing the danger it posed to the entire community's water supply. "I was afraid," she admitted to the room, her eyes finding Elena's for a brief moment of shared courage. "I stayed quiet for 2 years, because I was afraid of losing my career, my reputation, everything I had built. But my grandchildren drink that water. Your children drink that water. I couldn't stay silent any longer, no matter what it costs me." One by one, the 2 former employees of the industrial company responsible for the original dumping stood and confirmed what they had witnessed years earlier, describing barrels of solvent waste dumped quietly onto unused land near the reservoir watershed, an arrangement they had been told to never discuss under threat of losing their jobs. Throughout it all, Whitmore sat motionless at the council table, his composure beginning to visibly strain, small beads of sweat forming along his hairline despite the mild evening air inside the hall. Nathan Cole had gone pale, glancing repeatedly toward the exit, clearly calculating whether it was too late to distance himself from whatever was unfolding. Finally, Elena turned to address the council directly. 8 months ago, this board used an obscure legal clause to rezone my brother's property while he was deployed overseas, serving this country, timing the action specifically around his absence, so he would have no opportunity to object. When he returned and began asking questions, his truck brakes were deliberately cut on a public road. When we continued investigating, our home was broken into, and a written threat was left demanding we abandon our search for the truth. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle fully over the silent room. "I believe all of this was done for one reason, to seize control of a piece of land, sitting directly above evidence of a contamination cover-up this council has protected for years, in order to keep that evidence buried permanently, regardless of the risk to every family in this county." The hall erupted into overlapping voices, shock and anger rippling through the crowd in waves. Claire Bennett was already scribbling furiously in her notepad, occasionally glancing up toward the council table, where Whitmore sat frozen, his carefully constructed composure finally beginning to crack under the weight of dozens of eyes turning toward him with growing suspicion and fury. "This is a baseless accusation," Whitmore finally managed, his voice tighter than his usual practiced calm. "Circumstantial evidence, misinterpreted documents, and the testimony of a disgruntled former consultant who was let go for poor performance, not for uncovering any wrongdoing." "Then explain your signature," Elena said calmly, holding up the founding document of Meridian Holdings for the entire room to see clearly. "Explain why a shell company you personally helped establish is the registered owner of the industrial contract responsible for dumping solvent waste near this county's primary water source. Explain why my brother's property, sitting directly above the contamination plume, was rezoned using a clause that has never once been invoked in this county's history, timed precisely around a military deployment your office would have had access to through county records." Whitmore had no answer. The silence stretched long and uncomfortable across the hall, broken finally by a voice from somewhere in the crowd, an elderly farmer Marcus recognized from childhood, standing slowly with obvious anger in his weathered face. "My grandkids drink that water," the man said, his voice rough but carrying clearly. "You knew. You've known for years, and you let us keep drinking it while you played games with paperwork." Other voices joined his, rising in volume and anger, and the moderator struggled to restore order as the meeting dissolved into open confrontation. Sheriff Briggs, who had been quietly standing near the back of the hall throughout the entire presentation, finally stepped forward, his expression grim and resolved. "Given what's been presented here tonight," he announced, his voice cutting firmly through the noise, "I'm placing Council Chairman Gerald Whitmore under formal investigation, effective immediately, pending review by the State Attorney General's office. Mr. Whitmore, I'll need you to remain in this building while we sort out the appropriate next steps." Whitmore's face had gone entirely pale, the careful mask of control finally shattered completely. He looked, for the first time since Marcus had ever heard his name, like an ordinary man facing consequences he had never truly believed would arrive, no matter how carefully he had planned to avoid them. The following weeks moved quickly, each day bringing fresh developments that Marcus and Elena followed closely, sometimes together at the kitchen table, sometimes separately, as their individual roles in the unfolding investigation demanded. The State Attorney General's office opened a formal inquiry into both the rezoning of the Reyes property and the years-long contamination cover-up, drawing directly on the documents Elena had spent months carefully compiling. Environmental investigators descended on the county, testing water sources throughout the reservoir watershed, ultimately confirming everything Priscilla Doyle's hidden field notes had warned about years earlier. Gerald Whitmore resigned from the county council within the week, though resignation did little to slow the growing legal consequences building steadily against him. Nathan Cole, faced with mounting evidence of his own knowledge and involvement, agreed to cooperate fully with investigators in exchange for reduced consequences, providing additional documentation that confirmed nearly everything Elena had already suspected. Edward Lang, the private security contractor responsible for watching the Reyes property and delivering the threatening note, was identified through the license plate Marcus had photographed weeks earlier, ultimately facing separate charges related to trespassing, harassment, and the deliberate tampering that had caused Marcus's brake failure. The rezoning of the Reyes property was formally reversed within a month, the county issuing a public apology alongside the reversal, acknowledging the clause had been misused in a manner inconsistent with its intended purpose. More importantly to Marcus, the state ordered a full environmental remediation of the contaminated groundwater, funded in part by a settlement extracted from the industrial company originally responsible for the illegal dumping, a company that had believed, for years, that its arrangement with Whitmore had made the entire problem quietly disappear forever. On a clear autumn morning nearly 2 months after that tense town hall session, Marcus stood once again beside the old well near the tree line, watching a team of environmental engineers carefully install new monitoring equipment as part of the ongoing remediation effort. Elena stood beside him, her leather folder finally set aside, replaced instead by a simple cup of coffee she sipped slowly while watching the same quiet fields that had once felt so threatened. They said the water should test clean again within 18 months, Marcus said, watching the engineers work. Full recovery, according to their models. Grandpa would be glad to hear that, Elena said quietly. He always said this land would take care of you, as long as you took care of it first. Marcus nodded slowly, thinking of his grandfather's hands, weathered and strong, drawing clean water from this same well every morning of a long, quiet life spent working land he had loved without ever imagining the danger that would one day threaten it. I used to think coming home would be simple, he admitted, just quiet fields and open sky. After years of something much harder, I didn't expect to find another fight waiting for me here. Some fights find us no matter where we go, Elena said. The important thing is what we choose to do when they arrive. She looked out at the land stretching toward the horizon, gold and steady in the morning light, the same fields that had nearly been stolen away through quiet paperwork and dangerous silence. This is what Earth truly means, I think. Not just land on a map, or lines drawn by a survey team. It's what you're willing to protect, even when protecting it costs you something. Even when the people who are supposed to guard it choose instead to poison it quietly and hope nobody ever notices. Marcus thought of the deployments behind him, the friends he had lost overseas, defending ideas much larger than any single acre of farmland, and he thought of the quieter, more personal battle he had just fought here at home, defending something smaller but no less important, a family's legacy, a town's water, the simple, stubborn belief that truth mattered, even when powerful people preferred it stay buried. We should register the land under a conservation trust, he said suddenly, the idea forming clearly as he spoke it aloud. Make sure nobody, ever again, no matter how much power they hold, or how clever their paperwork, can quietly take this place away from the people who actually care for it. Elena smiled, the first truly relaxed smile Marcus had seen from her in weeks. I'll draft the paperwork myself, she said. Properly this time. No hidden clauses. No quiet loopholes waiting to be exploited by whoever comes next. They stood together a long while, watching the engineers work, watching the fields shift gently under the morning breeze, watching a piece of land that had nearly been lost stand finally, firmly protected, exactly the way their grandfather had always intended it to remain. Gerald Whitmore's trial began later that winter, drawing statewide attention as prosecutors laid out, methodically and completely, the years of quiet corruption that had nearly poisoned an entire town's water supply for the sake of profit and control. Priscilla Doyle testified with a steady voice this time, no longer trembling, no longer afraid, standing finally as the whistleblower she had always wanted to be but had once been too frightened to become. The two former employees testified as well, their earlier silence finally broken permanently and publicly. Marcus attended every session he could, sitting quietly in the gallery, watching justice move slowly but surely toward a conclusion that had once seemed impossible on the night his brakes had failed on a quiet county road. Whitmore was ultimately convicted on multiple counts, including fraud, conspiracy, and environmental violations, sentenced to a lengthy term that would keep him away from any position of public trust for the remainder of his working life. Nathan Cole received a lighter sentence in exchange for his cooperation, though his political career ended just as completely. By the following spring, the reservoir's water quality had already shown measurable improvement, according to updated testing conducted by the same independent laboratory that had first confirmed the contamination months earlier. The town of Ashford, shaken but ultimately strengthened by the ordeal, elected an entirely new county council that spring, including, somewhat to her own surprise, Elena Reyes herself, who had been approached by several residents urging her to run after everything she had done to protect the community's water and expose years of hidden corruption. Marcus stayed on the family land, rebuilding slowly, planting new crops in fields that had once threatened to be stolen and poisoned beyond recovery. He often thought back to that first evening home, the metal rod jammed in his truck door, the surveyors driving stakes into ground that was never truly theirs to measure, and he understood now, more clearly than ever, exactly what his grandfather had always meant when he spoke about what this land represented. It was not simply soil and water and open sky. It was a promise, passed down through generations, that some things mattered enough to protect, regardless of the cost, regardless of the danger, regardless of how powerful the people trying to take it might believe themselves to be. Marcus had spent years defending that same promise on foreign soil, far from home, never imagining he would one day need to defend it again in his own backyard, alongside a sister whose courage and determination had proven every bit as fierce and unyielding as anything he had witnessed on deployment. On the first truly warm evening of spring, Marcus stood once more beside the old well, now fitted with clean, modern monitoring equipment, that confirmed, day after day, that the water flowing beneath his family's land ran pure again. Elena joined him after a long day at her new council office, still adjusting to her unexpected role in local government, and together, they watched the sun sink slowly behind the tree line their grandfather had planted decades earlier. "We did it," Elena said softly, more to herself than to him. "We did," Marcus agreed. "But I think Grandpa did the real work a long time ago, just by loving this place enough to pass it down to people who'd fight for it when it mattered most." Elena smiled, resting her head briefly against her brother's shoulder, and together they watched the fields settle into evening stillness, safe now, finally, exactly as they were always meant to remain.